If you had to choose between your dream career and the person who still makes your heart skip a beat, what would you do? Welcome to Happiness of Love, your daily dose of K-dramas. Get ready to fall in love with unforgettable stories. Can you guess which K-drama inspired this story? Meghan Turner stood with her hair perfectly tied up in a sophisticated bun, admiring her reflection in one of the upstairs windows of her Seoul law firm. Her heart beat rapidly inside her chest, an alarm bell that echoed in her mind, reminding her of the pressure building in her shoulders. It was the day of the big meeting, the meeting that could give him the promotion he had always worked tirelessly for. But an unexpected text message from her boss made her stomach turn. "We need to talk about the customer. He values the image of family stability." The words resonated in his mind like an unwanted echo. Meghan, who has always kept her personal life far from her professional life, felt her legs shaking under the pressure of an expectation she had never imagined facing. The image of a married woman, with a husband by her side, now haunted her thoughts. What exactly could this facade mean? She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the suffocating feeling and focus on what had always been her refuge, work. But as the day progressed, surrounded by the frantic search for solutions, it was impossible to ignore the reality that surrounded her. And this reality led her to a dazzling gala event, where the rich and powerful gathered to discuss business and forge alliances. The glow of the spotlight reflected not only the luxurious decor, but also the smiling faces of the guests, who moved with a lightness that Meghan couldn't feel. What was supposed to be a night of opportunity became an emotional battlefield when she came across Ethan Matthews, her ex-boyfriend, a man who, in her memories, carried a mix of nostalgia and disappointment. Ethan was the love of her life, but also the reason she swore to stay away from relationships. Seeing him, a wave of emotions passed through her, and the small smile he showed when he saw Meghan, even if hesitant, provoked a whirlwind of memories that she had tried to bury. The shock was inevitable, and as they approached, the silence between them weighed more than words. He tried to start a conversation, his intentions seeming genuine, but she looked away, remembering all the broken promises and smiles that now seemed strange. The innocent release of gossip into the air, like a virus, quickly connected them to a scandal that was about to break. That storm of emotions led her to an unexpected impulse. Then, in a moment of pure emotional irresponsibility, she found the courage to propose to Ethan a deal that could save their lives. "You need help, and I need a husband for 3 months. How about we pretend we're together?" Disbelief filled his eyes, which soon turned into a typical expression of conflict. He hesitated, and the tension between them came to an end in an instant. And what started as a crazy proposal would soon become an intricate path, full of unspoken promises and forgotten feelings. Behind the facade of a marriage, there were thorns ready to blossom, feelings that, even buried, were about to resurface with all the strength of repressed emotions. With the oasis of a relationship facade ahead of her, Meghan found herself dancing in an emotional minefield. What seemed like a simple game in which she would control the rules would soon become a maze of revelations and deeper connections. So Meghan was about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever, full of love, challenges and pain she never expected to feel again. The gala event was filled with soft lighting that highlighted the elegance of the finely dressed guests. Meghan Turner adjusted her tie before entering, her heart pounding not just from the anticipation of the night, but from the pressure of what was to come. She was one step away from a dream that seemed tangible, but one small detail tormented her: the need to present an image of family stability to a client who could decide her future. When she finally crossed the hall, her eyes met a figure that looked more like a ghost from her past. Ethan Matthews, the ex-boyfriend from his younger days, was there, in all his decadence, surrounded by a group of people who were trying, without much success, to elevate his public image. His face, once radiant and confident, now conveyed a mixture of despair and determination. When he turned to her, there was a split second where shock turned into connection, a spark of lost memories that almost made them forget the time that had passed. Ethan tried to get closer, calling her by name, as a nervous smile appeared on his lips, and she could have sworn she saw sadness in his eyes, but Meghan quickly looked away, as if she were fleeing a storm. The world around her was filled with noisy conversations and laughter, but at that moment, everything fell silent, and she decided that she could not be that woman who would look back on the past with longing. However, fate has its tricks. A camera turned to them, capturing the moment as she ignored him, a look of disappointment lacerating the distance they tried to maintain. Their relationship was doomed not just by time, but by a contract that once only existed in his mind. It wasn't long after that irrational gossip began to circulate, the media speculating about a supposed reunion between the exes, and it sent Meghan's mind spinning quickly. Ethan's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of how much he loved her before everything collapsed. Upon returning home that night, Meghan found her phone buzzing incessantly with messages from coworkers discussing their famous reconnection, and as the frustration consumed her, a crazy idea began to take shape. What would follow would be a proposal so unreasonable that it would leave her panicking, but that could bring the success she so desired. She quickly thought that Ethan could be the salvation of her professional dilemma, an idea that, although absurd, endangered both her pride and the memories that were stored in her heart. When she finally decided to look for Ethan, she felt an uncontrollable urge to convince him that this could work, that in 3 months they could preserve appearances and at the same time rescue something they believed was lost in time. That next morning, a series of messages proved crucial, leading her to a meeting at the small cafe they used to frequent, a place that reminded her of simpler days, where laughter echoed over hot chocolate and dark coffee, and where the connection they once had seemed almost tangible again. The cafe still had a nostalgic feel. The decor of the dark wooden furniture and the soft light that came through the windows brought back memories of hugs in that same place that now seemed distant. Megan, with a racing heart, decided she needed to talk to Ethan and convince him to create a shell marriage. The idea seemed impractical, but deep down, a thread of hope was slowly growing, and as she sat at that table, she knew that this could be the solution to her 2 crises. Ethan, as soon as he saw her, gave her a smile, and she knew that, for an instant, there was something still there. Already at her desk, Megan proposed a contract. He would pretend to be her husband for 3 months and, in exchange, she would help clean up his image through the impact of his influence in the legal world. He hesitated, questioning his sanity, but the determination emanating from her was something he couldn't ignore. He said he was always enchanted by the way she bathed in a world of danger and opportunity in which legality was a swath disconnected from her deepest emotions, and at the same time, without certainty, accepted the deal. What they agreed on was that they would have strict rules, no emotional involvement, avoiding public fights and maintaining the facade of what they would call a perfect family. However, as the weeks passed, each stylized gesture they displayed publicly began to test them. As the plan unfolded, small details of their coexistence began to turn into unresolved emotions. Megan found herself in pain as she gave Ethan a quick smile as he brought her breakfast to bed. He remembered how she always loved the strong Americano, and the dynamic between them began to change. On the other hand, in moments of tension, Ethan would tease her about her obsessive dedication to work, and she would remind him of his responsibilities and what it really meant to be a husband. The atmosphere in the house was filled with playful tension, but Megan worried that they might end up hurting themselves again. Meanwhile, a variety show camera shifts the focus of their lives, hoping to capture a nuance of romance that, although there, was complex. When Ethan improvised during a live interview and started ranting about their relationship, Megan felt desperate. He said she was the best part of his day, and with that sentence, what was just a contract began to enter a space that couldn't be controlled. Megan knew, in that instant, that this was not the safe path she had charted. Meanwhile, amid her uncertainty, more doubts began to form, and she needed to evaluate what this meant for her career and what she really wanted, considering whether something that started with a contract could end in real, lasting love. The next part 1 will be part 3, where an unexpected event forces Megan and Ethan to interact and establishes their initial bond. Megan and Ethan sat at an elegant cafe table, the soft ambient lights reflecting off the surrounding glass cups, while the smell of ground coffee and freshly baked cakes filled the air. The tension between them was palpable, like a thread about to snap, and Megan managed a nervous smile, trying to break the ice. She began explaining what she had in mind, gesturing as she spoke, as if the intensity of her words could automatically make Ethan accept the crazy idea she was about to propose. "What if we were a couple, fake?" she said hesitantly, her gaze boring into Ethan's eyes for understanding. Ethan, for his part, couldn't hide his surprise. He watched her with an expression that mixed incredulity and skepticism, an eyebrow arched as he thought about all the implications of that proposal. "Are you serious? A sham marriage?" he repeated, trying to decipher what was going through her head. Megan nodded, explaining that the client who was analyzing her valued the image of a structured home, and to do so, it was necessary to appear emotionally stable through marriage. She detailed how much this meant for her career, emphasizing that it could be the promotion she always dreamed of. Ethan listened intently, his heart racing as her words echoed in his ears. Megan paused, and her gaze softened. "I just need you to pretend to be my husband for 3 months. Help me clean up his image and I guarantee that I will do everything to keep him away from the scandals." The sincerity in her voice began to resonate within him. Ethan let himself be carried away by a storm of memories of the past, of unfulfilled promises and laughter, but also of the sorrows that were still embedded in his heart. He hesitated, the image of the determined woman in front of him contrasting sharply with the fiasco his career had become. Finally, he said he knew this idea was crazy, but as Megan looked at him with that mix of hope and care, something inside him began to break through the barrier he had built around his heart. What if things go wrong? What happens if you end up falling in love with me again? Shaking his head, he laughed lightly, but it was a tense laugh, full of doubts and tension. Megan responded by saying that there was no chance of that happening, that they had strict rules to follow, no emotional involvement, maintaining the image of a perfect couple and avoiding fights in public. We're going to act, she emphasized, already imagining what these months would be like in his company. Thus, they formalized what was now a pact, a contract that would be the temporary link between them. Even as they signed the papers, the light breeze coming in through the cafe's windows failed to dispel the feeling that a storm was approaching. As coexistence became inevitable, they began to outline the new dynamic. Getting up together, shopping as a couple, or even acting out moments of affection in front of friends and colleagues became a routine. The simple act of sharing a bed turned into a daily test. He began making Megan coffee in the morning, a gesture he always knew she loved, and even the corner of her mouth turning up slightly brought back a web of feelings from a time they had unlearned to share. He noticed that even with rules to avoid any emotional attachment, small interactions like her adjusting his tie before an interview brought up old memories. One morning, after a small disagreement over the temperature of the coffee, Megan started making fun of the way Ethan hadn't yet learned how to make decent coffee, an old habit that proved how easy it was to rediscover fights that felt so familiar but also comfortable. However, even brief, happy moments were often followed by arguments. When the chemistry between them started to flow, a small gesture of affection soon turned into criticism. Ethan never missed a chance to tease Megan about her obsession with work, and in response, she always managed to find a way to criticize him for his irresponsibility. Once, during a live interview, Ethan decided to improvise about their relationship, with a confident smile that says marriage is a wonderful phase in life. Megan, instantly alarmed, rescued the situation with an eloquent response about how their partnership was beneficial to both of them, maintaining the facade they had become experts at. The tension between them seemed like an intricate game of charm and challenges, where the line between acting and reality began to blur. What was once a rational plan turned into a maze of emotions as new bonds were formed and old resentments came to life again. Thus, the facade contract became a complex network of unresolved feelings and unspoken promises, but the question that remained in their minds was, how far could they go in this act of love and forced friendship? The next part will address the development of the crisis in Ethan's image, where old scandals resurface and complicate the entire agreement they established. Megan Turner took a deep breath, taking a sip of her coffee before heading to the office. Morning light filtered through the windows, reflecting the liveliness of soul on a spring day. However, his mind was far from the beauty around him. She focused on a single goal, the promotion she had dreamed of for so long. As she hurriedly walked to the elevator, she couldn't help but think about how shaky everything had become after her unexpected reunion with Ethan Matthews. The actor who had once been the love of her life was now in her home, at the center of her sham wedding plan. Like a grandmother who always worried about what she couldn't see, Megan remembered the days when Ethan was a bright, rising star, full of dreams and promise. She was 23 years old, full of love and hope, but life had dragged him down a path full of scandals and disappointments. Now, he was just a name covered in controversy. Feeling powerless over her past and her emotions, Megan insisted on staying focused on her career. However, their paths now seemed intertwined in ways she never could have predicted. The rules they had set for their marriage began to seem more challenging as the days went by. When they got home from work, they headed to the kitchen, where Ethan was trying out his cooking skills, even if it meant heating up a frozen dish. He smiled when he saw Megan enter, and an inexplicable warmth spread across her chest. He said she looked tired, eliciting an involuntary smile from her as she thought about how Eric was still a master at drawing flame from chaos. Megan almost stopped him, saying he wasn't her mother, but instead decided to keep the peace. She had to admit that it was comforting to see him in this role, even if it was temporary. This coexistence was putting all his efforts to keep his emotions in order to the test. He, on the other hand, loved to tease her, making comments about her obsession with work. He said she should relax more, maybe watch a movie instead of reviewing endless documents. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help but smile. At the same time, her criticism of his lack of responsibilities was often a double-edged sword. What began as a simple professional challenge was turning into a tangle of feelings that the two tried to surround with irony. One day, tensions reached a fever pitch when they were invited to a live interview, an opportunity to reinforce the farce they had created. As part of the agreement, they were to talk about their life together and how their union was benefiting them. As the cameras started rolling and the questions started flowing, insecurity set in for Megan. To stay focused, she looked at Ethan, who was confident in his ability to improvise. When he started talking about how their married life was the best time of their lives, he carelessly twisted the narrative. And then the bomb, he, without thinking, declared that she was the love of his life. Megan froze. Her heart raced, and she felt exposed, as if everyone could hear the echoes of the past that still lived in her heart. The simple sentence, which seemed like something out of a romantic movie scene, began to devastate his carefully constructed emotional defenses. One could only wonder if he was acting or if there was a shred of truth in his words. At the end of the interview, the laughter of the reporters echoed in her ears, but for Megan everything was already confusion and anguish. The car was waiting for them outside, the world was spinning around them, and as they drove through the bright streets of Seoul, the tension did not dissipate. Megan turned to Ethan and, unable to contain her words, questioned with just a whisper what he really meant by that. He tried to deflect, joking that he was just getting into the role, but the look in his eyes gave away his true feeling. This conversation led not only to frustration, but to a deep reflection on what they both really wanted. Megan felt like her security was being breached. The feelings that were hidden beneath the facade of reason began to explode with full force. What was just a professional plan now became a dangerous dance that could make them lose their way. The lines were blurring, and she knew she would need to find a way to protect her heart. The next part of the script will address Ethan's image crisis and how this affects Megan's relationship and career. Megan watched the city lights of Seoul from her apartment window, the glow of the skyscrapers reflecting her ambition. With a big deal just a few steps away, her mind was absorbed in strategies and details, but the tranquility of that night was broken by a message that appeared on her phone, transporting her to a less promising reality. Social media was bombarded by a new wave of scandals involving Ethan Matthews, the actor she had forced herself to forget. And now, with the tabloids reporting on an old affair he believed he had buried, the entire image she had been building alongside him as her husband was about to throw her career into the mud. The client she was trying to impress had begun to suspect that the marriage was just a sham. Uncertainty moved through Megan's mind like a creeping shadow, leading her to question whether the sacrifice she was making for Ethan could affect her own credibility. However, when she met Ethan's gaze that next morning, a determined but clearly worried look, something told her that he too felt the weight of this situation. He approached her at the small coffee table, thanking her for making breakfast, and as she stared at him, Megan realized that despite the difficult circumstances, he was really trying to be a better husband. It was as if the roles they had both constructed, of a focused lawyer and an actor in decline, began to struggle with the hidden feelings that were being reborn between them. It was difficult for her to discern where the farce ended and reality began, and the increasingly blurred line between the two became increasingly painful. They needed more than ever to act out that perfect love, avoiding arguments and focusing on appearances. However, the conversations quickly intensified, and a palpable tension permeated every touch and every word. Ethan changed his tone, almost challenging, when commenting on Megan's obsession with her career, suggesting that she should relax a little. She, in turn, responded with criticism of his lack of responsibility, highlighting that he should be more resolute in his fight to improve his image. In an almost comical moment, as they were preparing for a new live interview, Ethan decided to take a risk, suggesting that, from that morning on, they would play a couple perfectly in love, which almost drives Megan crazy. She tugged on his tie, trying to stop him from doing something stupid, but he, amused, just smiled and said it would be his best performance. Tensions rose as the day unfolded, and in front of the cameras, they met once again and, for a brief moment, the energy between them became almost uncontrollable. When Ethan improvised during the live broadcast and declared that Megan was the love of his life, she froze. The world seemed to collapse around him. How could he say something like that without thinking about the consequences? She looked at him, and for an instant a mixture of confusion and hope came over her. Coming to, she realized she was in the spotlight, her surroundings pulsing with anticipation, but the rekindling flames of her feelings almost made her dizzy. After the event, the night dragged on, and they still felt the weight of those words hanging over them. At her home, Megan confronted Ethan, demanding to know what this meant. He said he was just getting into the role, but the look that passed between them said there was something beyond acting. Heart pounding, Megan backed away, terrified that everything they were doing could end up hurting her again. Frustrated, Ethan made an impulsive statement to the press, announcing that the couple had decided to take a break. Megan's feelings plummeted into a deep abyss. Once again her personal goals isolated her from a love she didn't know had resurfaced. When he left the house, the tension spread, leaving a vacuum that seemed insurmountable. Now, separated and involved in their emotional confusion, they were both faced with a choice between love and their ambitions. In that deafening silence, each person reflected not only on what had happened, but on what could still happen. The next dawn brought painful revelations. Just as Megan worried about her promotion, a newly received job offer from the industry's elite showed that Ethan would not escape the consequences of his past mistakes. The decisions they would make now would affect not only their professional lives, but also how they might feel about each other. In the next part, the conflict will reach its peak and both will decide what they really want, success or real love. The big social event that Megan and Ethan were looking forward to arrived, and the atmosphere was filled with anticipation and glamour. The bright lights of the room reflected off the crystal glasses, and soft music filled the room, creating a perfect setting for what was supposed to be just another public appearance as a forced couple. Megan, dressed in an elegant blue dress that accentuated her figure and showed off her confident posture, adjusted Ethan's tie with an automatic gesture, remembering all the rules they had established. He, in turn, was trying hard to maintain his composure, despite his traitorous look that betrayed the anxiety he felt. She realized that his presence, even if surrounded by complicated memories, brought unexpected comfort. As they walked around the event, always holding hands, Megan struggled not to think about all the history they shared, but there were moments when the tension between them dissolved into laughter and knowing looks. When a client approached, showing interest in their spontaneous moments of connection, Megan began to feel more relaxed and even asked Ethan to dance with her. The touch of his hands, the feeling of the heat radiating from him as they slowly gyrated on the dance floor, made something throb in his heart once again. The music enveloped them, and the dance became something more than a mere act. It was as if, for an instant, they were rediscovering the chemistry that once brought them together. The looks they exchanged spoke beyond words, and she remembered how they used to dream together, before life and their choices separated them. At the height of this exchange of feelings, the dance seemed suspended in time and space, and the two found themselves so close that the barriers they had built seemed to finally crumble. It was at that moment that a reporter, attracted by the visibly intimate aura that emanated from them, asked an unexpected question about their relationship, trying to capture what many thought was beyond a simple contract of convenience. Without thinking twice, Ethan explained that Megan was the love of his life, words that hung in the air like an echo, terrifying Megan who, for an instant, felt the world spin around her. Silence hovered for a brief moment before the music intensified again, but she remained thoughtful, wondering if those words created in the heat of the moment were something he truly believed or just another act designed to maintain the charade. Upon realizing the repercussion of the statement, the sound of camera flashes surrounded her, and the expression of surprise on her face did not go unnoticed. Confusion pulsed inside her, a mix of anger and emotion that she couldn't name. The event went viral on all social networks, drawing their lives into a new and perplexing plot. Megan felt totally exposed, not only as a rising lawyer, but as the woman who could make a romantic start with the man who once hurt her. What did this mean for your quest for promotion and the image you worked hard to build? As the song continued, she questioned whether she should approach Ethan about what had just occurred or whether she would leave everything in the hands of fate, the echo of that statement resonating in her mind, draining her ability to focus. For the rest of the night, she tried to remain composed and receive the compliments diplomatically, but Megan's mind was far away, lost in a mix of nostalgia and uncertainty about the path she could choose. When they finally left the event, a strange distance settled between them, and she knew she needed to clarify what was really happening, even if a piece of her heart wanted to believe that, perhaps, this was a step towards something truer, beyond a mere act of facade. The next part one will be the explosive discussion, where Megan will confront Ethan about his statement and all the tension built up between them will culminate in an intense fight. After the social event, the atmosphere between Megan and Ethan was thick, as if the air was charged with static electricity, ready to burst at any moment. The lights of that gala still shined in their memories, but the connection they had experienced that night had turned into a maze of doubts and uncertainties. Megan, still in shock from Ethan's statement, felt her stomach tighten at just the thought of confronting him about what he had said. It was as if the walls around him were tightening, and the feeling of claustrophobia began to envelop his heart. She knew she needed answers, a clear understanding of the reality they had created together, even if it was a farce. When she found him in the living room, their expressions met, but there was no joy or love in their connection. It was just a wary look between two strangers who happened to share a past. Megan gathered up her courage and asked about his statement, her voice shaking as she touched on the fragility of the moment. He responded by saying that, in fact, it had just been an improvisation, as if trying to minimize the severity of the emotional words that had escaped. However, the look in Ethan's eyes didn't seem to match his words. Megan could not fail to feel a stir in the chest, a mixture between anger and confusion. This self-affirmation infused in it an unskilled rule: it was restricted to feel. Taking into account his history of disappointments and wounds, he had moved away had become a defense mechanism, although he knew him instinctively wrong. At the same time, the ancient sorrows of the past haunted it, emerging as shadows of what had happened between them. Ethan, in turn, began to feel frustrated with Megan's coldness, which in turn seemed to incorporate the emotional distance he himself fought against. In an explosion of insecurity and the need for response, he, in front of the cameras, made an impulsive statement, talking about how they decided to take a time, and at the same time felt a wave of despair by visualizing Megan's contradiction reflected in his expression. For her, that was like a stomach blow. At that moment, his professional and personal world threatened to collide hard. Being associated with Ethan in the face of the crucial client could destroy not only his career, but his reputation in society. Megan, frightened and wounded, felt tears accumulate in his eyes, freezing each word in his throat, while Ethan turned and went out the door, the echo of his footsteps resonating like a lament in the fragility of the agreement they had made. The separation of the couple did not seem like an end, but an anguishing transformation, the passage from one era to another, and while the doors closed behind him, Megan was sure everything was about to change. The empty space in the room witnessed the pain of two shattered souls, both unable to see beyond their own uncertainties and fears, while time advanced, stacking moments of love and anger into a delicate balance, which could generate both ruin and redemption. In the midst of this emotional confusion, their decision was about to graduate, a watershed that would not only define its future, but would also put it to what they really felt for each other. In the next part, we will address the unexpected turnaround where Megan discovers that the customer knew of the past relationship with Ethan and used this information against her, while Ethan receives an offer to an important role that forces him to end fake marriage. The sun was beginning to put on Seoul, covering the city in a tone of orange that contrasted with the skyscrapers of glass and steel that rose toward the sky. Megan Turner walked through the city center, the weight of the world on his shoulders as his heart struggled between love and ambition. Days ago, she was about to be promoted to the partner of her law firm, a dream that caressed with a silent eagerness and an underlying fear that accompanied her ever since. Her absolute career focus was stirred by accidental reunion with Ethan Matthews, an echo of her youth, a man she could never really disconnect, even after the way things ended between them. Now, in the illusion of a forced marriage that should mask his muscled insecurities, every moment alongside him made her question not only the decision she had taken, but also the feelings that began to emerge with unexpected vigor. While fighting with his thoughts, a message notification pulled her from her ramblings. It was an email from her boss, who invited her to an urgent meeting. Megan's heart accelerated, the cold in the spine intensifying as she read the message that left her with her flea behind her ear. He had suspected marriage facade could be more than a mere contract. The man who was a client of the firm was not just an ordinary client, but someone who had ties to the past of Megan and who knew about the scandal that had been between her and Ethan in the past. Megan took a deep breath, recognizing that the vulnerability that had settled as a shadow on it could finally be used against its professional ambitions. The following hours have become a whirlwind of intrigue, stealth conversations, and potential proposals. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was immersed at a meeting that, any other day, would have been any actor's dream, but now it looked like a trap. He heard how this new offering of a role could be the redemption he wanted so much, but at a price he was not willing to pay. The producers, always meticulous in their tricks, made it clear that completing the shoot would require any connection with their false marriage to be undone. Every excuse he tried to find to deny them sounded fragile in his mind. He remembered the woman who had known years ago, ambitious and strong, and why the two had not worked. The search for fame had made him cynical and lost, and now he was on the verge of losing his best part, the connection to Megan. Recognizing this, he left the meeting with a mixture of fear and frustration, staring at the future with the uncertainty of those who no longer know where he belongs. With a heavy spirit, he received a message from Megan, asking to meet. He imagined her sitting in some elegant coffee with her decided expression, ready to face the challenges ahead. That autumn morning, as soon as they sat face to face, the tension between them was palpable. Megan seemed restless, biting his lower lip as he tried to gather the courage to speak. Ethan watched her, knowing she was fighting her emotions, and finally asked how her situation was. Megan sighed before opening his heart, detailing the implications of that meeting with his boss, his insecurity as to the forced relationship, and the pressure surrounding her. He had difficulty hiding frustration and concern as her words began to dissipate the emotional burden that took up the space between them. He interrupted her, saying that she was willing to do whatever she was needed, even if it had to finish that agreement. Megan froze in response. The idea of simply giving up what they had built, even if he started like a scam, scared it because he involved feelings that made her vulnerable again. While Ethan's words echoed in his mind, her head ran with the decision she had to make. He looked at her with the intensity that only souls who have already shared extraordinary connections knew, and while feeling attracted to this darkness of feelings, a shadow began to rise over them. And even before words were said, what should be a negotiation conversation became an emotional battlefield. The pressure from the outside world, the family expectations and the weaknesses they had both hidden began to emerge, and they were ready to fight not only for their lives, but for each other. Megan realized that life goes around, and the tension that hovered in the air symbolized not only the weight of its decisions, but the love that grew again among them. Now, in the face of this choice, they would need to decide what really mattered, to get the fame and achievements they wanted or allow themselves to love without shackles, even if something else was at stake. The next part will address the moment when Megan and Ethan had to attend a major event with the customer and how this will impact their lives and the nature of their agreement. During the weeks that followed the emotional explosion that separated Megan and Ethan, both surrendered to a moment of deep introspection, each within their own lives and battles. Megan, now alone in his small minimalist apartment in Seoul, surrounded by papers and tests, looked at the window to move the street, his eyes watching the passing people, seemingly happy and carefree. The morning sunlight illuminated his office, but did not bring warmth to his heart. She was always a focused woman, and her career has always taken the lead in her life, but what had that cost her? An echo in her mind arose, the idea that, for fear of getting hurt again, she had closed for all kinds of love and vulnerability. However, Ethan's presence still seemed to resonate inside her, a sweet memory that danced to the whispers of his thoughts. She thought of how his smile used to illuminate her days, how he had the ability to turn common moments into precious memories. What would be her career, the one she had prioritized so much, if it meant losing someone who could be so important in her life? It was a dilemma that tortured her, but also made her reconsider her priorities. On the other side of the city, Ethan fought a similar whirlwind of feelings. Now completely alone in his apartment, where the walls seemed to be screaming for company, he felt the pressure of a declined career, a stained reputation, and the weight of the decision he had to make. Looking in the mirror, he saw not only an actor, but a man who always dodged responsibilities, who had never really faced the consequences of his actions. He remembered the beauty of Megan, his strength and determination, but also the discussions they had during that difficult time together. The memories of laughter and hugs mingled with those of disagreements and hurts, and he could not help thinking about how staged marriage had forced them to re-evaluate their past together. However, everything that seemed promising was now involved in uncertainties. By receiving the proposal of an important role, the first real opportunity to revive their career, the producers made it clear that the marriage contract would need to be closed before filming began, a strategic movement to avoid any controversies that could emerge. He hesitated, feeling his heart divided between the ambition and the love he had aroused in his life, a love that he began to understand as true. Meanwhile, Megan was in a meeting with his boss, where the pressure increased. She finally got the promotion that she had fought so much, but the joy seemed distant, almost as if a weight held it down. When he gave an involuntary look at his cell phone, he crossed a friend's message, congratulating her for the prestige he could, but his mind had fun with the idea that happiness overflows were harder to find than career certifications. Even in such a grand moment, Ethan's absence made her anxious, and she caught himself wondering if the position she had won was really worth the price of what they could have together. Vibra from her cell phone brought her back to reality, and when she opened the message, she realized that she couldn't ignore the idea that perhaps it was time to reconnect. A new wave of determination invaded her. While feeling nervous, Megan decided that she needed to denote the truth that existed between them. True love was more important than any career, and finally she had an idea. Hours later, when the night fell, Megan decided to risk and look for Ethan at a promotional press conference for a project where he was involved. Her friends encouraged her, but her heart throbbing with doubts about the true intentions behind her visit. As soon as she entered the place, the lights shone, and the camera's flashes illuminated the scene, creating an environment of euphoria, but also of nervousness. When Ethan entered the stage, his eyes met for a brief moment, and the disconnection of previous days seemed to melt like snow under the first rays of the sun. His gaze reflected confusion and curiosity, and that was all that Megan needed to understand that their story was not over yet. The impulsive act she had performed took her in front of the cameras, and as she prepared to pronounce, she felt it was time to reveal to everyone that the contract that joined the two began as a game, but now, no doubt, it was real. At that moment, Ethan, with a look of surprise and a hesitant smile, could not avoid interrupting her, and put herself on her knees, asking her to really marry, her words resonating with the sincerity of those who realize that life is too short not to risk really loving. So Megan smiled, his eyes filled with tears as all the conferences were speechless, and the flashes continued to shine, illuminating what could be the beginning of a new chapter, a love story that had resisted in time and difficulties. The epilogue of the narrative would reveal the life that they could build, balancing their careers and love, proving that even cold contracts can end up in happy endings. The next part one will present will be the exciting conclusion of the story. At the press conference, the room was full of journalists and stunning cameras, all eager to record the latest chapter in Meghan Turner and Ethan Matthews' life. Meghan, with an elegant dress that fit perfectly with every curve of her body, felt the weight of expectation. It was the decisive moment, and there, in the midst of flashes and whispers, she looked into Ethan's eyes, who was by her side, with a nervous, but hopeful countenance. At a surprising impulse, Megan began talking about the journey they both had traveled, from the troubled beginning of a facade relationship to the true connection that had flourished between them. She sincerely explained as that initial marriage, motivated by a contract, had evolved to a genuine and deep commitment that she could never have predicted. Megan's words captured everyone's attention in the room, creating a climate of palpable expectation. However, before he could complete his speech, Ethan leaned slightly forward, interrupting his attention now centered on him. He took a deep breath, a fixed gaze on Megan, and, in a firm and clarity voice in his eyes, made a statement he took everyone by surprise. He asked Megan in marriage. The murmur that followed in the room was drowned out by surprised smiles and accelerated hearts. What began as an staged scam now turned into something real, leading everyone to wonder, was it really possible for love to hide under the layers of a contract? Megan's gaze illuminated to realize that what he felt for Ethan was much more true than he had ever imagined. At that moment, as his hand intertwined in his, the room seemed to disappear. The cameras, the reporters, the external pressures, everything faded in a second. But Ethan also knew there was more at stake. He had a choice between continuing in the same trajectory or betting on love that he had found. At this moment, with the feeling overflowing between them, both in collective and real life, a new story was drawn on their horizon, with promises of challenges, laughter and lasting moments that both were willing to face together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Happiness of Love. That way, you won't miss any of our heartfelt romances. See you in the next love story.